In the first weeks of 1941, a small force of desert veterans and mechanized scouts pushed hundreds of miles behind Axis lines deep into the Sahara to strike at an Italian outpost few people then believed vulnerable. Their destination was Murzuk, an oasis garrison and airfield in southwest Libya, far from the main battlefronts of North Africa. The success of this mission demonstrated the potential of long-range mechanized warfare in the desert and helped establish the Long-Range Desert Group as a distinctive and highly effective presence in the North African campaign. Origins of the LRDG. The Long-Range Desert Group was conceived not as a conventional combat unit, but as a specialized reconnaissance and raiding force capable of operating independently over vast distances. Its founder, Ralph Bagnold, was an experienced desert explorer whose understanding of sand, machines and navigation transformed the way the British Army approached operations in the Sahara. The official history by W.B. Kennedy Shaw later described the LRDG's role as operating far behind the enemy's lines, emerging suddenly from the inner desert to raid important airfields or lines of communication, and then vanishing back into the wilderness. The unit's methods drew directly on techniques developed during the interwar years, when explorers and surveyors tested vehicles, navigation and logistics in the Libyan Sand Sea and adjacent regions. What distinguished the LRDG was not merely daring, but preparation grounded in hard-won practical experience. Men, machines, and navigation in the desert. By late 1940, the LRDG had organized itself into patrols, each a self-contained column of vehicles, supplies, and men. The Murzuk raid was mounted by a combined force drawn chiefly from T Patrol, composed largely of New Zealand volunteers, and G Patrol formed from British Guards units, under the overall command of Major Patrick Andrew Clayton. Accompanying them was a small Free French detachment, led by Lieutenant Colonel Jean Colonna Dionano. The backbone of the force was a Canadian military-pattern Chevrolet 30 hundredweight truck, selected for reliability and ease of maintenance over extreme distances. The vehicles were modified for desert service. Non-essential fittings such as windscreens, doors and roofs were removed to reduce weight and mechanical failure. Wide low-pressure tyres and sand mats were carried for dune work, and fuel and water stowage was maximised. To reduce water loss, many vehicles were fitted with condensers that recovered steam from the cooling system and returned it as liquid water, a critical adaptation in a waterless environment. Navigation was the LRDG's most distinctive capability. Magnetic compasses were unreliable when mounted near metal vehicles and of limited value in terrain without landmarks. Bagnold's sun compass, which determined direction by the sun's bearing relative to time, became a standard tool. Patrols also carried conventional compasses and astronomical instruments, including sextants, allowing them to fix positions by sun and stars and maintain accurate courses across hundreds of miles of featureless sand and rock. For combat, the trucks doubled as mobile weapon platforms. Patrols mounted 303 Vickers and Lewis machine guns, Boys anti-tank rifles, and in some cases 37mm Buffers guns mounted portee on the rear of trucks. The Murzuk force was thus equipped with a single Buffers gun. RAF pattern Vickers K machine guns were also used where available. Individual troopers carried standard infantry weapons including Lee-Enfield rifles, submachine guns, pistols and grenades. The drive on Murzuk. Commanded by Major Patrick Clayton, a force comprising T and G patrols, 76 men in 26 vehicles, left Cairo on 26 December 1940. From Egypt, they drove southwest, crossing the Egyptian Sand Sea and the Kalancho area of the Libyan Sand Sea, keeping clear of established routes, wells and oases. The straight line distance to Murzuk was about 1,000 miles, but the ground and the route chosen stretched the journey far beyond that. After entering desert country northwest of Kufra, the force moved through belts of sand and stony ground beyond normal military movement. At a rendezvous roughly 150 miles north of the Tibesti Mountains, Major Clayton detached part of the force. With 4 trucks, he drove southwest to Kayugi in the Tibesti foothills to meet Lieutenant Colonel Jean Colonna Dionano and a small Free French party. The French had brought petrol forward by camel across the mountains, making the continuation of the raid possible. While Clayton was absent, Lieutenant W.B. Kennedy Shaw led a small party to examine a pass through the Egei Mountains, so described in the New Zealand history. Though in reality a belt of low, broken hills and escarpments, Shaw confirmed that the pass could be used by vehicles. 11 January 1941, striking at Murzuk. On the morning of 11 January 1941, the force reached the road running south from Seba to Murzuk. The road was mined and picketed to prevent interference, and the column advanced along it towards the oasis and the fort. Surprise was complete. A group of natives at a well, mistaking the vehicles for Italian troops, gave the fascist salute, and an Italian postman cycling towards the fort was captured and compelled to act as a guide. Lieutenant Ballantyne led a troop of T patrol against the airfield, while the remainder of the force deployed against the fort. The guards' Boffer's gun, 2 2-inch mortars, machine guns and rifles were brought into action. Once the initial shock passed, the Italians resisted steadily from within the fort. During the fighting, Sergeant Howson of the New Zealanders was killed when he stood up to clear a jammed machine gun. Several others were wounded, including men who remained at their posts and kept their weapons in action. A mortar round struck a petrol drum inside the fort and set part of the structure alight, destroying the flagstaff, among other things. During the engagement, a staff car drove up to the fort gate, carrying the garrison commander. The car was hit by machine gun and Boffer's fire and destroyed. It was later discovered that his wife and 2 children were also in the vehicle. At the airfield, Ballantyne's troop closed on the hangars, firing on Italian personnel attempting to man defensive positions. Major Clayton, accompanied by Colonel Dionano, drove to encircle the hangar area. When the truck rounded a corner, it came under close-range machine gun fire. Dionano was killed instantly. The hangar was then taken. About 25 prisoners, most of them Air Force personnel, were captured. 3 Caproni CA-309 Ghibli aircraft were destroyed, along with a wireless installation, bombs, fuel and parachutes. The hangar was set on fire, and explosions continued for some time. After roughly 2 hours fighting, the fort had not been taken, though it had been contained and damaged. The principal objective of the raid, the destruction of the airfield, had been achieved. Withdrawal. Clayton ordered the withdrawal once ammunition was expended and casualties sustained. Some prisoners were taken, but most were released because of shortages of transport and rations. Hewson and Dionano were buried beside the road near Murzuk before the force turned back into the desert. The return journey was slow and difficult. Mechanical failures occurred and wounded men were carried over great distances. One seriously wounded guardsman was taken by truck hundreds of miles to the French post at Zoa before he could be flown back to Cairo. Italian casualties were limited, but the damage to the airfield was decisive. The raid showed that Italian positions deep in the Fezzan were vulnerable to attack. Legacy. Murzuk was an early demonstration of what long-range desert columns could achieve. Using lightly modified trucks, careful navigation and planning, a small force struck a remote enemy position far beyond the front line and returned across the desert. The raid confirmed the practicality of deep penetration desert operations, strengthened cooperation with the Free French, and helped define the role the long-range desert group would play in the North African campaign. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, commenting and subscribing. Until next time.